Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Today is another wonderful evening for us, another conversation in a series of so far 6 conversations on the theme of Artpark Idea series. What is the Artpark Idea? Today we're joined by the daring, stunning, humorous, celebrated American sculptor, installation artist Owen Morrel. Owen Morrel has been creating prominent site-specific sculpture for over 40 years. Among his major works is Omega at Artpark, a 40-foot-long mirrored geometric interactive illusion and a movable compass that tells discontinuous time. The installation is currently at Artpark, but is in need of restoration, and we will discuss later what it is going to involve and how you can help. You can start today. We have a very special offer with the generosity of Owen Morrel, who donated original posters from 1980 when the installation was first installed, signed by Owen himself in a very limited edition of only 31 posters. With a minimum donation of $250, you will be one of the first patrons, donors to contribute toward restoration of Omega, and we will discuss also the residencies at Artpark and why they are so important and what role they played in lives and work of artists like Owen Morrel. The conversation is hosted, as always, by Dr. Bennen. You will have a chance to also interact with us and ask questions. We have a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen where you can post your questions. We'll read them out during our conversation as we will see them fit, or toward the end of the series. Enjoy. I'm going to pass this on to Dr. Anthony Bennen and Owen Morrel. Welcome.
Owen, so wonderful to have an opportunity to speak with you. Of course, everyone in Western New York so admires your work, and we recognize how the excellence of your work is carried beyond Artpark to the nation, if not the world. In thinking about and preparing to speak with you tonight, I was taken by surprise, Owen, because I did the math, and you were 30 years old. You were just a kid.
Ouch.
Ouch. Yeah. You,
Ooh,
it's did you have
it seemed like 5 minutes, so make sure every day counts.
did,
Keep going. I want to hear what
no, did you have Omega in your back pocket? Were you seems like you had such a vision, and I am having trouble imagining that that the complexity of that piece is delivered by a pretty decent young man. That you pulled it off, huh?
I guess that that's my I am good at logistics, and I know how to orchestrate, and I think guys and gals who work like me have to be orchestra leaders, you know.
Well done. Well done, Owen. In my research, I also looked in the catalog from 1980. The director of visual arts was Richard Huntington at that time, and he's an estimable artist and a critic here in Western New York. And in the catalog, everyone in the catalog fills up a page with their writing about the piece. And Owen, you write a poem, and it is through the light energy of the mind. Omega points to the future beyond the self, to no mind or one mind. Watch the rocks, follow a river to its source. Omega.
There it is. That's very sweet of you to find that. Where did you find it? Oh, with the catalog. Jesus. Yeah, not bad.
Not bad, huh?
Yeah.
Are you a poet? Are you a poet? Huh?
I lived in Greece for a while, and I was living in Greece, working with a ceramicist, a Greek potter. And I lived on a little island called Paros for a while. And I became a master potter, moved back to New York. And believe it or not, I actually was, placing my ceramics in galleries on Madison Avenue. So it didn't hold my interest. I wanted to keep making things bigger and bigger and bigger. I wanted people to get inside the work. I didn't want them to look at an object. I wanted them to be part of an experience. And the ceramic thing lasted a few years for me. It's not rocket science, but I met some great people doing it, and it's a very spiritual process with the kiln and the fire, and I liked it. Anyway, but
nice.
I forgot which question I was answering, but it's a good tidbit.
No, and you have continued writing poems?
I love to write. I love words. And I love the English language, and I love to play with my friends. I drive them nuts. A couple of them are sitting here because I'm always fiddling with language.
Now, I want to bet that the complexity of a piece like Omega, simple architecture made complex by breaking rules.
The simplest things are always the hardest to build. Go ahead.
Yes, but it's a complex piece, and I'm gambling that the complexity of that piece has origins that are as delightful and simple as your poem.
No, that's very nice.
Is that correct now?
I'm going to share some thoughts. If it's okay, I'll try and get through it briefly, not so that we can look at pictures because they're more important. But I just want to talk briefly about my background, because I was born on the Great South Bay of Long Island, in a little community that was just beginning with immigrants from all over Europe who came from Brooklyn and Manhattan and Staten Island and everywhere to move to the suburbs. Sounds like something like what's going on now, actually. But there was an exodus from the city. And then again, we've also all lived through the exodus back to the city. But in the 1950s, the exodus was all the immigrants were coming out to Long Island and buying land and building little houses. My father bought a little plot of land on the Great South Bay for $20,000. We had a house on a peninsula that jutted out into the Great South Bay. And I had a Boston whaler, a little 12-foot boat. And I would go out every day across the bay to the ocean. I was nurtured by nature. It would be the iconic takeaway from that little blurb. But the interesting thing was where that influenced Omega was my father he was a small town surgeon. He was the kind of surgeon like Marcus Welby, in a more perfect world maybe or a simpler world for sure than the one we live in. My father took me around on weekends when I wasn't in school, and he had his little doctor bag, which you don't see any doctors carrying anymore. And he had a little office, but he would go to people who couldn't come to him. And we would go to trailer parks and little houses in this, it's whatever. He would see everybody. And he was a very generous guy. And he did okay, we were middle class, I suppose. But he had a little wooden fishing boat, and he kept it out in Montauk. And he also managed to find an old Cessna, a little Cessna airplane, a 2-seater Cessna. And my father and I spent many days, many weekends. And we would get up early in the morning, and it was one of those planes where you had to actually grab the propeller and push it and say, clear, to make sure you didn't get chopped up by the propeller. But anyway, we flew 100 miles every weekend, pretty religiously, in some clammy weather, I gotta say, but because Montauk gets fogged in. We flew out to Montauk along the coast, and on that flight, I would take the wheel for a while, and you could see forever on a good day. And we followed the beach. and we followed that beach all the way. It's a straight, it was a wavy line, but and we come into Montauk. Montauk always covered with, you couldn't tell the sky from the sea, from the tarmac. So we almost lost it there a couple of times. My father would park the boat, we'd jump into his little fishing boat, and we would go 50 miles offshore. He was a giant tuna fisherman, swordfish guy. He was a dyed-in-the-wool Ernest Hemingway fan who idolized Melville and thought I think he had some Queequeg dream or something, but he wanted to become a harpoonist. And he learned, he practiced with the harpoon, and you're going 20, 30 miles an hour to harpoon a fish. Not that I'm in favor of harpooning, but this was part of my life. And we would harpoon the fish and we ate it. Not many, but at those days, the sea was full of fish. Now it isn't. But we did not fish for nets. I mean, we got one fish a day, and it was very exciting. But the boat is the thing, and I loved his boat, and I loved to be on the sea, and it was very important, fun for me. I wouldn't say important, but in this case, it's important. I would go out to the front of the boat where there was a pulpit, an extension. It was called a pulpit, and you went out, had a handrail, and it was a mesh deck, and the boat's going really fast. And I would sit on my belly on a platform, on a pulpit, and that stuck out from the bow of the boat, and like I was flying, and I would watch the dolphin skipping over each other, playing games with the bow of the boat. At the same time, I'm seeing a 360-degree vista of the planet, the horizon line, and and then there were days where it was the sea that was itself was the thing when we got stuck in big seas. And I lived on the boat in the summers, and I worked on the docks. I worked on lobster boats. I worked on charter fishing boats. I just did anything I could possibly do to be near the sea. I built 2 houses in Long Island, both on the water. And but the salient point is the boat, the pulpit was where I laid and watched the fish jumping over underneath they were skipping with the strips, what do they call it? The slip screen or whatever it is from the tidal thing, from using the energy from the boat to even make them go faster. And I watched them for hours. And when I went up to Artpark, to wrap this one, to get onto the picture of Omega next, we should show. Why don't we go to Omega after the desk, and I'll come back to the desk. Okay, this is Omega, but why don't we show them the video? I can talk over it a little bit, maybe, if we can get to that. But the Omega I designed on the airplane coming home from my visit to Artpark. I knew the minute I went there, when I saw those pillars, that was where I had to build my piece. And I said, if you let me work there with those 2 pillars and build you an observation platform, I would be happy to make this happen. And that's basically, I drew pictures of various ways to make the pulpit into a geometric form. I picked the Omega, which is, from the alphabet. And it very much is about new beginnings and the end. It's a great piece, and it just captures the energy of that little zone of the planet in a very powerful way. And I think for me to see this thing get restored, and even talk with the modifications we're talking about for safety, it's an incredible piece. It will never happen again. And I think it's worth all of our efforts to see it through. And it's a complicated piece, but at the end of the day, we didn't have any trouble building it, and we could fix it. So anyway, if you want to go back to the desk, I can talk about the desk, because the desk, unless I missed something.
Now let's because from here we move to another installation, do we not, on Long Island?
Long Island, I don't know. But the desk was the first rooftop piece I did in 1975. And the amazing thing about this telescopic, I built a telescope, and you could climb into the desk up these little struts and sit in the chair and look in the desk plotter. And in the desk plotter was the Statue of Liberty in the New York Harbor. So it was a monument to freedom. It's a very relevant piece right now. I'm trying to build it in Florida. We don't know yet, and it's funny because I rented a loft in Brooklyn, and this was in the loft, and I made it into a telescope, welded up the steel, and put it on the roof. And this was the beginning of my rooftop work, which explored the verticality of the city, which contradicts everything which I was learning and loving and growing from in Long Island and growing up, because we had the expanse. I had the expansive vision. And in the city, you live in the caverns, you live in the valleys. And I wanted to get people to the rooftops so they could get an overview of the city and use the city the same way that I used those bridge pillars in Omega. And I did after Omega, I don't know what's coming up next on your queue. This was the next piece, and this was written by a really good guy, and we play through the voiceover. I think would be good.
On the west side of Manhattan, to see one of the more unique examples of public sculpture in New York. The piece is entitled Boomerang. It is by the 32-year-old sculptor Owen Morrel, and it is spectacularly placed on the 32nd floor of the McGraw-Hill building. The piece is a viewing platform, and like a boomerang, it literally takes the viewer back and forth into space. The wings of the piece are covered with reflective metal, which reorients our spatial experience and carries us up to the clouds. Morrel's piece is a heady experience, and it is with reluctance that we must once again return to Earth, and it will remain installed for the next 3 years.
The 3 years turned into 23 years, I'm happy to tell you. And the sub story with that piece with the boomerang, which was that will never happen again in the modern world. And I can tell you that the landmarks preservation people, Lori Beckelman was the head of landmarks preservation for New York City, and the New York Preservation Commission wanted to make Boomerang a permanent installation on the skyline of New York. And they fought hard for it with the real estate company, the real estate company who did it and helped me finance it initially. They were very nice people. They wanted to get out of to sell the building to somebody who was not into who just didn't relate to the piece. And so the only reason it did not come a landmark was because the people who owned the building had a temporary permit for 3 years. For just that reason, they didn't want it to impose on, because it was on the building. So, and it was a historic building. And it's the first time Landmarks Preservation has ever done that. And they haven't done it, to my knowledge, since then. So this piece that's on the screen now is called Lighthouse. It was built in 1997 for an energy company that powers the city of Syracuse and I believe Oswego. It's called Lighthouse. And again, it was inspired by very much like Omega. It's a sister piece to Omega. The condition it looks in this picture, I found out, is exactly the condition it's in. The stainless steel, the Imron paint, and the aluminum, everything is in perfect shape, and it's functioning like a charm. So that might be a good model for us. The next piece we have is Texas Tech. Yeah. Oh, Compass Rose. All right, we'll go back. Oh, this is Compass Rose. Okay. Well, it's a good thing I have enough pieces out there that I get confused. So.
I don't think of myself as thinking big. I think of a scale that is environmental, that has potential to be participatory, and allows people to enter into it, rather than an object which wants you to look at it at the expense of everything around it. The mirrors are very literal, and they are used to include and reflect the ambient space around the sculpture, so that the sculpture is not self-important, that it's an all-inclusive, that it's including the viewer, the architecture, the site as a whole, so that it becomes all like a pastiche.
That Compass Rose was done in Oklahoma City, 2013, and it was done. The commission was issued because of the bombing, but it was not. They didn't want. The bombing was still fresh, the Oklahoma City bombing, but they had a beautiful memorial with that done, which I had nothing to do with, and they wanted my piece to be more of a compass, which is why I called it Compass Rose, to give them a new direction, a direction forward, positive, and they love it, and they're taking good care of it, and that park is the hottest place in Oklahoma. So that was a very, very fun piece, and I met a lot of good people there.
Owen, before we get too far away from Syracuse, we have a question about who commissioned the piece in Syracuse.
It was commissioned by Scythe Energies. CEO is a very, very dear friend of mine. He's been a friend of mine now for 35 years or so. And I crossed the block, and his name is Kriegel. William Kriegel was the owner of Scythe and this piece. And he sold that company, and now he's the largest producer of solar energy in the continental United States.
How wonderful that! Thank you for that. And I might interject. We have a comment is saying, "I will never forget walking out onto Omega. It was installed at Artpark around my senior year of high school in Lewiston. I grew up climbing the edges of the gorge." And the writer is saying that she will never forget being there. So moving on.
Who was the writer?
Christine DeFazio.
I'll be done. Okay. Thank you.
Texas
Tech. Astrolabe. And if you notice, a lot of these names come from navigation and, navigation and plotting a course. And again, it's all about the sea. I'm going to talk a little over this one a little bit.
Installed in June 2014, the public.
I think it's good to remember my story, which I actually didn't complete.
Building at Texas Tech.
The boat part of it I got, but my father was a scientist. Also he was involved in research, and I was a pre-med student, believe it or not. And I changed from pre-med to to take ceramics, and then from there when I was about 17. But the combination, what I'm driving at is the combination of the science and the sculpture were the two. My father was a scientist and my mother was an artist. So it had a pretty big impact. That and my environment and the surroundings, I would say, formed this guy. This piece, Astrolabe, is in front of an experimental science building. Built out of 2-inch aluminum, and they love it. Matter of fact, they liked it so much that I built another piece there, which I think we're going to see. The arch is in Arlington, Texas. Yeah. Not a literal Mobius, but is referring to the Mobius. And it has a reference to M.C. Escher, I suppose, who was about maybe the first conceptual artist, M.C. Escher, in his own way. I want it to be about the act of seeing. I want it to be an experience. I want there to be as many different notions of what the piece is about as there are people who travel through it, because it's subjective. So I want everyone to have their own experience. There is a order behind it and a story, but the story really starts with each viewer, and I want them to make their own stories. And I've been trying to do that. I've been doing it with a measure of success, I guess, for 1970s. So this piece was a huge success, and 12 million people a year are walking through the hoops. So that's a nice thing. In the background is the Dallas Cowboys. There's a lot of sculpture inside there. But I like where this piece is. It's the approach road to the Dallas Cowboys and the Texas Rangers Stadium. All stainless steel, and it looks like the day we put it in. Every one of those little things, every one of those little, what are they, hexagrams, are mirrors. So they spend a lot of time taking care of it, and it looks like they love it. So that was a fun piece. And here's the piece Cubi we built for Texas Tech in 14, 15, 18? 2018. And this piece was inspired by, and I'm doing a version of this piece, which I'm going to show you in a minute. It was inspired by a drawing in a book that my mother gave me when I was a teenager, and it was one of these big fat Da Vinci Bibles. And I opened the page to Da Vinci's drawing of a cube, which he latched onto as the objective correlative, or as a symbol of the interconnectedness of all things in the universe. He felt that the cube was the best visual expression of the interconnectedness of all things. So, you know, to me, I fell in love with that piece, and I've been playing with it for a while, and I cut a bunch of them out, and I discovered that I could form these magic cubes by hybriding this thing at an angle, and then I found a way to seed it. And it was the happy accident. I built a bunch of these shapes and we put them together, and it's a very powerful piece, and it takes over the landscape. And I'm doing a version of it, which I'll show you in a minute when we get through. It's a very different piece, but it's the same vocabulary. And Texas Tech loves it. And here's the piece that I'm building currently and in the shop, which is similar to the Cubi at Texas Tech, but it's going to be a vertical. The construction is all very, very different. It's all, we're drilling and screwing, and then we put stainless steel over that, and that should be due to be installed as soon as we can start getting on airplanes and put this thing on a truck. It should be finished within the next, I'm guessing this piece will be finished in the next 6 weeks. And I'm going to show you a model of it after we get off the screen. I'll bring it to the screen and give you maybe a better idea. But the magnitude of it's a 15-foot high piece. It's going to sit at the entrance to the new Design Innovation Hub at Kent State University, which is also a very relevant place right now in my mind for a lot of reasons. We don't have time to get into that now, but there's the piece, and it sits at the entrance to this Design Hub, Innovation Hub, where biologists, mathematicians, art sculptors, everybody, they're going to have people working on collaborative projects and pooling their energies, which is the wave of the future in education. I put some drawings in the feed here so that you could see the evolution. I love to draw. I go through periods of drawing. I go through periods where I don't draw and I like to cut things out. But I love to draw, and I get lost in drawings. The days slip by. I love it. And this is a piece that hasn't been built. Although it's spiral tower, but we're building versions of, we're building hybrid versions of.
Do you have a model, a maquette to show?
Let me show that, sorry. I'm gonna pick this, I have to put on these gloves, but I'm not gonna put them on anyway. I am gonna put on these gloves because it keeps my grip. And if I drop this thing, it has to go back to New Jersey. And I wait 6 months in this climate to get it back. So take 5 seconds of your time, get my fingers into these silly little pockets. And this is the piece we're building in California right now. It's 15 feet tall. And actually, the views, as you turn it, change. It's not because of the position of it. It actually gives you a little leaning tower of Pisa thing going on, but it's not going anywhere. It's going to be buried way down into the ground. And I'm very excited about this piece.
Nice. Thank you for that. Sonia, we've had a question, and we have flirted with the idea in our conversation about the restoration of Omega. Can you give us an update as to where we are in that thinking?
Well, Omega's been with us for now, 30 years almost, right?
40.
40 years.
I'm not counting right. 40 years. And for at least close to 20, it has been close to the public, and many of us have such tremendous memories of it. One example was Christine here, but there's so many that remember their childhood, their young years, getting through this installation, going on top, seeing the stunning views, seeing their perspective reversed, and it's such a wonderful landmark at Artpark, and I personally find it very important to find a way to restore it. At this point, we're looking into taking it through a very important process, and Owen, you've been so incredibly generous already with your time and ideas of what might be the best way to perhaps reconsider some safety aspects of it, right? We want to make sure that it's safe for all the audiences and that it's restored properly. So we're looking at, right now, we're working with a structural engineer to assess exactly what its current condition, and then create a plan, a budget, and go from there. And we will be working with New York State Parks very closely as to assessing the best way to proceed. So that's sort of
where does this path? Where does the path that Mr. De Beers or whoever's in charge of that, the path from Manhattan all the way up?
The Shoreline Trail, a bike path.
Right.
So it was the larger path, I believe, is called Empire State Path. The part of the path that goes through Niagara County is called the Shoreline Trail, and that's a project that is now being built out and developed by Greenway Commission, New York State Parks, in partnership with a number of state and community funders. Artpark is on that path, and my dream is that all the new visitors and tourists that will come through will be first and foremost exposed to Omega as one of our major landmarks at our park. I hope everybody agrees. If you don't, write a comment. Let's talk.
Well,
Empire Trail. Thank
very
you.
Iconic. Go ahead.
Jeff is correcting me. Empire Trail is correct. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Owen, you've been wonderful in helping and think about restoration. And a questioner asked, "Are you involved?" And you've indicated that you are already, and we trust you'll continue with good advice and your interest.
Absolutely. I think it's a it's a worthwhile endeavor. We were lucky enough that I am organized enough, I guess, that I was able to save the drawings. That should help us. I was surprised I found them, to tell you the truth, but it looks
Now,
like
we noted when we were talking earlier about the nature of this conversation. On one hand, it's Artpark, and on the other hand, it's ideas. And we'd like to string the ideas that were formative in creating your work at Artpark and see if we can't trace the formative ideas for Omega and their influence upon the way in which you continue with your art.
yeah, that was, you mean the influence of Omega and the way I'm continuing with my art?
Yes, what's the principle behind your work from Omega going forward? Surely, one of the things that you discussed already is its perceptual interest. It beyond structure. It involves the act of seeing and the act of
it involves actually the dismantling of the act of perception.
Nice.
Yeah, it actually is an anomaly on the landscape, which forces you to stop. And then it precipitates a whoa, and then it precipitates a what is that? And then it draws you in. And it's meant to get you to a place where you can see farther and see things differently. The Zen saying, when you climb the mountain, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers. When you get down, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers, but they're different. So, it's a vantage point. It's a tree house. They're not pictured here, but I actually built rings around trees at some point with telescopes to make people's vision more expansive. But I think the magic of that spot with those stone pillars, the way that Omega used them, I think was probably, was obviously, it did very well and has survived a long time. I would love to see it reborn.
Well, by locating Omega within the structure.
I don't know
Go ahead.
I just didn't know if there was any missing piece to that last question. I'm happy to answer.
Well, you gave
We're trying
the
to find
cue.
the impetus behind where I went from Omega, I believe.
Yes.
And the next piece after Omega was the Boomerang in 1981 in New York. And then I did Pilot Bridge, which was a piece on a giant boulder in the middle of Broadway. And they were all the same thing. They made Mark DeSuvero wrote me a note when he saw my piece on Lower Broadway, and he said how beautiful it was. He was with a friend of mine, Dick Bellamy, years ago. And I wanted it to be in the middle of the world. I didn't want it to be a precious object on a pedestal, although I have one behind me. We make models. But I wanted to give people I knew after Omega that there were experiences that I could create with whatever powers have been given to me that could change the way people see things. Or let's say a more modest would be to have a profound effect on the way people, see things. We have become anesthetized by the cathode ray tube, and the perception is not, can be. That's why I think there were a lot of people. Gordon Matta Clark was a good friend of mine who worked at Artpark, and we were all Gordon Matta, Charlie Simmons, Mary Miss, who you're working with, Robert Smithson, who didn't work there, and Christo, my dear friend, who I want to throw in here but Christo was a dear friend of mine. He was one of the closest friends and fastest friends that I made in New York, and he was extremely helpful in realizing Omega. We did have some shortfalls, and Christo helped. And I'm certainly not ashamed to tell you, I was a young kid and I was doing what I could, and it was a big budget project. We went over budget, not big money, but it was something. And Christo came to my aid and fell in love with my work and became a very dear friend. So in memorial to Christo, because we haven't had any sort of memorial for he or Jean-Claude, excuse me, who was the motor behind Christo. And she was the power and he was the poet. They were incredible people. They told me a lot of things. They are partially responsible that Omega exists. I have to get this in here. And I miss Christo every day. I loved him. And Jean-Claude was basically somewhere between my sister and my mother. That's that story.
You've known so many. I remember your friendship with Vito Acconci, for example, another great Artpark legacy, and from that roster of renowned people, from those that you never met, who has been your hero and who's your hero now?
I move around with heroes. I don't like to get fixated on heroes, but I can tell you that Vladimir Tatlin was a huge influence on me. Malevich was a huge influence. The spirituality of his art. Marcel Duchamp, of course, was with my desk. That was my Duchampian effort. And that piece was, the response I got to that desk piece was unbelievable. In 1975, before we had computers, that thing went out over the AP wire, and there were shows all over the world from it. I mean, it was insane. That's why it wasn't insane at all, but I feel that it's extremely relevant right now, that desk piece. And so we're going to see if we can't come up with something on that one.
Where was that located, the desk piece?
The desk piece was located at 725 Union Street in an apartment, in a loft building that was owned by a Kendall Shaw, who was a very good painter, and a friend of mine who got me a job at the Brooklyn Museum Art School, where I taught ceramics, actually. And it was owned by Kendall, and I had a workspace in the building.
How high was it?
It was a 6 or 7 story building, but Brooklyn at that point was not built up, so you had a clear shot to the World Trade Center.
Well, it's clear you're not afraid of heights.
No, actually, I'm terrified of heights and agoraphobia, which is why I'm not terrified of heights anymore. But I think it's what attracted me to conquer all my fears and to really to search for new limits, to push myself. We built access routes up, straight up oak trees, 75 feet, and built a ring around these oak trees and put telescopes on the trees so you could see the landscape when I was in my 20s. And I guess I love the heights because they're scary, because, you can it's dangerous. But I love the exhilaration of the sight lines, the change of the sight lines, and it was worth the risk, so I took it. And I mean, you hold a handrail, you won't get hurt.
Oh, and a delightful question has just come. And given what you said earlier about the intersections of various disciplines of study, the questioner proposes, how would you figure that you would work if you had the opportunity to work and collaborate with the architect Renzo Piano and Saul LeWitt? Now, do we establish with that trinity a workable?
I knew Saul LeWitt, and he was an amazingly nice guy. He was one of those. He was just a good guy, a humble guy. I don't know Eric Clapton, but I assume I could have a cigar with Eric Clapton and a glass of cognac, and it would be like that. I mean, the guy was.
Okay, so let's keep that ball in the air. Let's add Renzo Piano to to the mixture and ask what would you figure you three would come up with?
Whoa.
Nice question.
That's an exciting concept, and I would like to. I would take a humble stance on that one and wait for some feedback from Mr. Piano on what he's building, and then I would start thinking. I mean, a commission like that would be for a project that has where an architect has some sort of vision of what he's going to build, and I think the sculptor, if it were me, would want to see what the idea was, what the function of the facility will be, who's going to be the users, and what's the form of the building, and then and for me the grading, the landscaping, the grading around it, is it going to be flat? There are so many things there that the architect is going to control. I would wait, but I mean he's a brilliant guy, and I admire his work, and I would hopefully come up with something that would be commensurate with a project like that.
Well, let's not put Piano in the driver's seat. You're driving, and you have Piano and Saul Lewitt working with you. What's it going to look like?
I don't know. That's I can tell you that right now the piece I'm building is extremely influenced by Saul Lewitt, and who else are we talking about? Saul Lewitt and Renzo Piano. And I would say I'm very familiar with his architecture, but so I would say somewhere in that geometric vernacular that I'm in now, that's not so idiosyncratic. It's not. It's more universal because those guys are working in with accessible shapes that have a universality, a geometry to them, and I would try and plug into that.
Now we have Saul Lewitt. Now perhaps he'd just assume that you would give instructions to someone else to do a work, and how would you and Piano contribute? Saul Lewitt in the driver's seat now, and he's happy to return to old ideas, in which delightfully he gave instructions to an arts organization or some other to fulfill the parameters of his instructions.
I would like to see more than one of the piece I'm building in Ohio will show up in more than one place because it's just so universal and it's so timely. Now I have a feeling that would be, I would say, a version of the piece I'm building right now. I have 6 pieces standing behind me that haven't been built. So I got plenty of works to choose from, and I'm an active guy, and I love to think and be challenged. But the piece I'm building now for Kent State, a version of that, maybe with a better budget, we could, budget is restricting very often. It sets the parameters. And I would love to take that form and light those coves so that so the pieces, so you see, it would just add another element and make it really cool at night. And I just think that the connection and the relevancy of this Tower of the Squares is just, it's a mouse. It's just got me hung, and I have to get this one installed. And I have other pieces that are in the works. But I would, in this situation that you're hypothesizing, I would ask that they look at that and consider that model that I just showed you, and let's make some modifications to make it different. But that's
So let's bring Watson and Crick and their double helix into the equation. How would they influence? You're from a science background and biology at that, so would they be good playmates?
I would love it. I think they'd have to bend a little bit, but
yeah, not Crick. He was.
No, I don't know Crick. I mean, I know who he is, but
yeah, his research after DNA was into the substance of the soul, if that's possible.
Can
He
you
was, he's quite a wonderful inquiry. Yes?
You getting that?
Can you bring it over?
I'll try to do that. I don't know if the plug's gonna reach. See if you can grab that plug. This is a variation of the piece I built in Arlington, Texas,
Nice.
which I showed you in front of the stadiums.
Right.
And I would say Watson Crick would love this piece, or
Yes.
a variation of it, maybe.
Yeah. So,
That's about as close to DNA as you can get without being DNA. And then we took the shadow lines from the form,
mhm.
which was very John Cage, I would say.
Oh, good.
It's where it fell, where the shadow fell. We drew the lines and illuminated it. And it's pretty cool. I love this piece.
So when you return, we've got another question that is compelling. And it is Omega site specific? Could it be any other place than where it is?
And oh,
Good.
no way. No way. Those pillars, which mimic Mr. Roebling's pillars of the Brooklyn Bridge, we'll leave it there.
Yeah.
And it was the site of the first suspension bridge of, and the elevations in there, the surrounding landscape, the Niagara, which is one of two rivers in the world flowing north, I believe. Is that correct? The Nile and the Niagara. They're the only two rivers that flow that way.
Sonia?
Well, check it out. It's not going to change the conversation, but
yeah.
I was under the impression
this is great new
that
information. We'll use it somehow.
yeah, I mean, it's one of the only. I'm pretty sure. Not
But
going
we have confirmation.
Fact check it.
Did you we have confirmation. Yes,
Alton
it's correct.
says yes, that is
Okay,
correct.
so the Nile and the Niagara are the only two rivers on Earth that flow in that direction. Those pillars are extremely powerful. I saw that piece on the pillars. I gotta say, within a half an hour, definitely within the same day, I saw that something like Omega resting on those pillars, and just to memorialize and canonize the site of the first suspension bridge over the Niagara River, and the other things that are happening there in that location.
Mm-hmm.
Omega is just about the most perfect site-specific piece I've ever done, I got to say.
Well, then it truly plays with the river, doesn't it? It is, the gorge is also so very important to it.
The mirrors catch the whirlpool. The mirror overhead catches the whirlpools from the river. It has tidal, there are whirlpools in the thing. It's flowing so fast. And underneath, so I reversed everything. You get the sky under your legs, and over your head, you get the Niagara River. We might change some of those shapes a little bit. We can take a look at that, but they could maybe, we'll see, or you'll see, or you'll ask, or we'll talk about it. But the mirrors could be played with a little bit. The pitch.
Well, there were artists when I was working in a museum. There were artists who would come and 20, 25 years after the fact say they would like to return to remake their piece, which we had acquired. My vote. Make another one.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's but your attention to the ecology of the place that you're working from gorge to sky to historic
the bridge,
pillars.
all those bridges. I'm interrupting you, excuse me, but the bridges in the distance, and then this bridge. There's a continuity of bridges, and then there's this elliptical bridge that relates to all those bridges and and the history of the site being the first suspension bridge over the Niagara River. I mean, there's so much content and history there. It's that the piece, in its delicate nature, in its openness, gracefully bows to the power of the earth. It's not, it doesn't say, look at me, I'm a big sculpture on the land. It says, climb up here and look at this planet from this site, and it may change something for you, or you'll see something you won't see anywhere else. I mean, it was an incredible thing with the motions there and the birds. There's a lot of content there. I think it's probably the most exciting site I've ever worked on. And I was the only guy, again, the McGraw-Hill building was a pretty prominent spot. It certainly was probably the most famous spot, although Dallas Cowboy Stadium is pretty well known. But this site is just, it's so beautiful and perfect for that piece. I hope that you guys, that we can all put it together. I'm standing ready to help. So.
Well, that is a wonderful way to close. Thank you for it. And I'd like to read again what you said 42 years ago, and that is the dedication, if you will, for Omega. Through the light energy of the mind, Omega points to the future, beyond the self, to no mind or one mind. Watch rocks, follow a river to its source. You said it.
Yeah, I remember writing it, man.
Nice.
It's pretty cool. That spot is, I see it as I'm feeling very positive. I get a good read on things, and the energy will build. I mean, it's the right piece, it's the right place, and it's the right time to give everybody something like that. You know. So.
And as Jeffrey Williams here says, it will be restored.
I believe him. I believe him. We've been talking about it, and I'm ready.
Me too. I think we will continue working.
And there's a lot, I'm going to interrupt, but there's a lot of people out there I know that will help us too.
Great.
And you guys have been terrific. I didn't know what I was going to come up against when I spoke with Jeff. We hit it off, and that's been going on for a year or two, just before the pandemic, I think we spoke. But I'm very pleasantly surprised with you guys being so enamored with the piece and so emotional about it. It's a very special thing, and it's to see that piece built would certainly be a landmark for my lifetime, and I think it's worth it, and I'll put my back behind it.
Thank you.
Well,
thank
you so much. We and to all of our audiences, thank you so much for staying with us, for your amazing questions. And now is the time for you to get involved with us as well. Write to us. We would love to work with you and our community and restoring this incredible landmark for the ages. Thank you all. Well, good evening. Remember about our posters today. You can be a proud owner for your minimum donation of $250 or more, with a signed poster by Owen Morrel. And we will see you next week. Our next is Even Lewis, and after that it's Philip Burke. So join us next Friday and the Friday after, and we'll see how it all goes. Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening now. Thank you.
Thank you.